an interesting thing that we need to particularly pay attention to is what has transpired after the humanitarian or the unilateral humanitarian ceasefire had been put in place. As I had shared with you already, this unilateral humanitarian ceasefire was enacted by the government solely intended to enable humanitarian assistance for farmers to utilize the rainy season. You would recall that there was a lot of international outcry. There was a lot of outcry about enabling this access to support civilians reclaim their livelihoods. So in that effort, the government did take this decision that was a political decision as well as a security decision that was reached through deliberations within the National Security Council. However, the TPLF have outright rejected the ceasefire, and this has been made public, and rather pushed the people of the region into further risk. Following the government ceasefire, TPLF have continued with their belligerence and fatalistic approach of encroachment into other regions. So it's not something that has remained contained within the Tigray region, but this encroachment has gone further into the Amhara and Afar regions. So instead of taking this opportunity to support or taking the unilateral ceasefire to support Tigrayan farmers and those in need of humanitarian assistance within the region, as that was a huge outcry even from their end, they have resorted to mobilizing civilians as human shields and violently harassing communities in the Amhara and Afar regions, as well as within the Tigray region. Particularly the lives of farmers in the Amhara region and pastoralists in the Afar region are being destabilized by the terrorist enterprise that has resorted to further escalating the situation rather than de-escalating it, and this humanitarian ceasefire provided that opportunity to de-escalate further. However, here, as you may have noted, the international community and particularly also the international media have been shockingly mute with regards to this. We have reports of women's farming monasteries in the Amhara region that have been targeted and looted while the women fled and hid in the forest till the TPLF recruits left. We have also evidence surfacing of utilizing children as combatants by the TPLF, employing and utilizing illegal substances to encourage them. In this regard, the federal government asserts to the very quiet international community on this particular matter that children are not soldiers and civilians need not be utilized as human shield for the TPLF's destructive exploits. There are also reports that indicate that food assistance that I mentioned to you, about 400 or more than 400,000 quintals of wheat that had been left in storage for the needy, is being exploited by the TPLF for recruitment. Humanitarian assistance in transit to the region has also been blocked from reaching those in need by the group. Furthermore, we also have been receiving reports of killing of Tigrayans considered pro-government by the TPLF and who are residing within the region. Confirming the group's exploitation and violence against the very people in whose name it says it is standing for. Another point of concern for the federal government as well as partners supporting the case of refugees is the safety of Eritrean refugees within the Tigray region, which is threatened with the presence of TPLF forces, particularly in refugee hosting areas. Reports of up to 6 killings of refugees have come in so far. The properties of the Agency for Refugee and Returnee Affairs and other partner properties, including the World Food Programme warehouses, have been looted and items confiscated, as reported by ARA. Refugees are being forced to contribute in kind and in cash to rebels. Adding all to this, all efforts by the refugees to move out of the conflict zone has also been prevented, giving the impression of a hostage situation. On the contrary, there are reports of forceful transportation also of refugees, trying to relocate them to 2 refugee sites that had been folded by the federal government because of the insecurity that had prevailed in that area even prior to the rule of law operations having begun. And this refugee camps had been closed following the attacks in November 2020 by the TPLF, but now we are getting reports that there's efforts to move them back to that area. So while all these overt, very overt, egregious various acts are being committed by the TPLF. They're also very open and vocal belligerence against the stability and security of the state has escalated with these blatant statements and threats to attack other regions and the capital as well. So this silence around that, particularly around international communities, is something that needs to be once again raised and questioned. Despite the challenges that the current situation has opened, and following the unilateral ceasefire, the government is continuing to work with partners to assuage the challenges of humanitarian assistance delivery. There has been, as I mentioned earlier, an outcry with regards to the need for humanitarian assistance. Nevertheless, the government is working closely with partners, and humanitarian aid supply and distribution system guidelines, transport system guidelines have now been developed to facilitate the humanitarian coordination with partners that are active in trying to find a way to deliver assistance. Related to the blatant statements and this overt hostility that is now at play from the TPLF side, the public response, particularly the Ethiopian public response to these aggressions against the state and to the nations and nationalities of Ethiopia, has been met with the nationwide condemnation across the country, as you've witnessed over the past few days. The diaspora community, or Ethiopians living in foreign countries, have also added their voice to condemn the TPLF's aggression and violence. All across the country are mobilizing to thwart the threat declared by the TPLF, and many are also enlisting to join the National Defense Forces in what has become a national tagline of "I will march to save Ethiopia." Renouncing the TPLF as a terrorist organization and the need to reconcile with fellow Tigrayans who have deep roots, blood and familiar ties with other nations and nationalities has been expressed by many across the country. So this clear delineation of calling a spade, which is the threat posed by the TPLF criminal enterprise, versus the people of Tigray that are also part of the fabric of the Ethiopian society. So this is something that has been repeatedly been expressed in public outcries over the past week. So despite the TPLF's attempt to wage a rift between the people of Tigray and their fellow Ethiopians for their personal political gains, Ethiopians all over have been very vocal in differentiating, as I told you, between the culprits and the innocent Tigrayans in whose name TPLF and their operatives continue to trade. I would like to say a little bit before I open it up to questions in terms of the response by the international community and the international media, who have at previous junctures been overtly vocal about support for the region. In developments following the government's decision to enact a humanitarian ceasefire and exit some of the cities, the international community's silence has been quite outstanding. I've repeated that, and I want to re-emphasize that again. So a clear double standard seems to be at play in the silence towards TPLF's harassment and overt belligerence. So it's not a silent belligerence anymore, but these are statements that are being issued through various social media channels from spokespersons related with the rebel group about an attack on regions and the capital as well.